Educate yourself to lead yourself, for if you wait on others to show you the way, you will wait for a long time. And may I just add a touch of what I know, if he doesn't kill me, a touch of what I know about his work. He is a tireless mentor to the young men and women in this community, whether or not they are his students. And please join me in welcoming Professor Damon L. Fordham.
Okay, first of all, is my mouth big enough for this? All right, y'all can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, could you, thank you. Now we all know why we're here today and what we are here to commemorate. Thank you. And when people ask me about Mother Emanuel, all right, okay, yeah, that'll work. That's fine. That's right. Thank you. Okay. All right. I often have to remind people that there is so much more to Mother Emanuel than the night of June the 17th, 2015. For one thing, people don't understand the rich history and what that church means to this community as well as the history of these United States. Many people don't know that Mother Emanuel, in fact, was not its original name. It was originally Hempstead AME Church over on the east side, beginning around Drake Street, about 1818. And its pastor was the Reverend Morris Brown. And one of the class leaders, in some of your churches you call them deacons, in the AMEs we call them class leaders, was the legendary Denmark Beasley. And when his slave rebellion proved to be unsuccessful in 1822, a mob burned down that Hempstead AME church. For the next 43 years, black people in the Charleston area were not allowed to worship independently. They had to then worship in the balconies of white churches while their masters were on the main floor. Or they had to have a white person present in order to prevent revolution. That situation continued until the arrival of a man named Reverend Richard Harvey Kane. Reverend Kane, who was born a free man in West Virginia in 1825, was pastoring in Brooklyn in 1865, shortly after the Civil War ended. And he came down here and he took the remnants of the Hempstead AME congregation and moved and had a building placed over on Calhoun Street. And he named it after the Hebrew word for God is with us, which is Emmanuel. And it was the mother of the new black churches in Charleston. And this is how we get Mother Emanuel. Now, Reverend Richard Harvey Kane is one of the great unsung heroes of our history. For not only did he do that, he also led a march against the massacre of African Americans by racist mobs in Hamburg, South Carolina in 1876. They had a march over on Market Street over that. He also founded the independent black town of Lincolnville, South Carolina. And he also, in 1875, he was also a representative from South Carolina during the Reconstruction era. And he argued persuasively for a Civil Rights Act that would not be passed until 1964 in its complete form, which would have ended segregation in public places except for churches, schools, and cemeteries. And he said that you use our labor all of these years, but yet fail to grant us these basic rights. Shame on you, he said, in his ringing oratory. He moved to Washington, D.C. after Reconstruction and passed away in 1887. And several years after that, a Reverend Veal had to rebuild Mother Emanuel at that location after the Charleston earthquake of 1886. But it continued in its role as a leader in this community. Back in 1898, there was the lynching of an African-American postmaster by the name of Frazier Baker in Lake City, South Carolina. And the trial was held right down here in Charleston at the courthouse over on Broad Street. They had a mass rally at Mother Emanuel, and among the speakers were Dr. Alonzo McClellan. Those of you who grew up in Charleston remember McClellan Banks Hospital. And Dr. McClellan was who that hospital was named after, along with his nurse, Anna Banks. And another one of the speakers was Reverend John L. Dart, for whom the library is named today. And they said, in regard to the lynching in the steps of Mother Emanuel, we think it is time for this savagery to stop. The lawgivers tell us that there is a right for every wrong. If so, why does Christian America stand with its crimson hand in the scene of human butchery, helpless and without remedy? The platform on which you stood for the suffrage of the American people repudiated lynching and declared for equal and exact justice for every citizen of the Republic. And yet, an extra session of Congress has convened and closed, and months of a regular session has passed, and without the pen stroke of legislation to prove the good faith of that pledge. Hear this prayer. The blood of 2,000 men, women, and children pleads for action. And they took that message and sent it to the President of the United States at the time, William McKinley. Now, about some 11 years after that, on March the 19th, 1909, the great educator Booker T. Washington spoke at Mother Emanuel. And these were some of the words that he said on that fateful day. We do a good job of talking about each other, but difficulties and misunderstandings arise because we do not do enough talking to each other. In proportion as we talk out plainly and frankly, letting each other know what is in the heart of the other, we shall reach a better understanding, an understanding which will enable us to live in peace and happiness. Those words, as we know, were as true today as they were when Booker T. Washington spoke them at Mother Emanuel in 1909. Then about some 50 plus years after that, you had the Reverend Benjamin Glover at Mother Emanuel. And he was leading the young people of that church in marches for civil rights here in Charleston. And among the people that spoke there, there's a famous picture of the great Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King speaking in the pulpit along with Charleston's own great civil rights leader, Mr. Esau Jenkins. And Dr. King spoke that day on equality under the law. And people who were at that speech have told me when I asked them about it, that it was the first time that they realized their full value as citizens of the United States and what could be possible here in Charleston. And so this is the major background of the type of church Mother Emanuel was and meant to a lot of us, and that's why it was so sacred to us. And on April the 4th, 2015, I'm an AME also, by the way. I go to Friendship AME in Mount Pleasant. And I've been to Mother Emanuel on a number of occasions. But on April the 4th, 2015, they hosted the Asante Children's Choir, a group of African children from Uganda. And the children sang and danced and filled the church with joy and laughter. And after it was over, we went down in the basement. Wayne Singleton, the organist of that church, he and I grew up together. So he and I embraced and we laughed and talked for a while. And shortly after that, bear with me on this one, folks. Shortly after that, Reverend Clemente Pinckney came out of his study while everyone was happy in the basement. So I hadn't seen him in a while, so he smiled and pointed at me and I smiled back at him. And he came over and we embraced each other. And so he joked and said, "So, Fordham, people still asking you if we're related?" And we had a good laugh because he and I sort of physically resembled each other. That was the last time I saw him alive. And so we all know what happened 2 months after that. I was coming out of class and a young lady friend of mine called me and told me what happened. And I got on Facebook and told people, if you have no business doing so, please stay off Calhoun Street. Let the firemen, let the policemen, let the ambulance people do their jobs. Let them do what was necessary. And my first thoughts came to Wayne, of course, because as I said, we grew up together, and I know how dedicated he was to the church. But then I found out the next day what happened. And remember what I told you earlier about the lynching in Lake City back in 1898 and what was said to that church? Well, I got that information because when I was writing my first book, I did that research at the John Dart Library. And Cynthia Hurd had these papers that they had unearthed recently at that point, and she let me use them for that research. So we all know what happened after that, and we all know what we're dealing with and everything, and we all know what has been said about our community and so forth and how we reacted to that and everything. There are many who have said that a lot of what was done didn't quite go far enough, but we have to, in looking at this, look exactly what do we want out of this. And once we figure out what we do want out of this, that is when we have to make the steps of making possible. The president came down here, as we all know, and sang Amazing Grace. So what we have to ask ourselves, Charleston, is this. Will we have that amazing grace to make our school system a better school system and not one that prepares people for a permanent class of cheap labor? Will Charleston have the amazing grace to have better relations between the police and its citizens as we are about to get a new police chief? Will Charleston have the amazing grace to not just make this a moment of holding hands, but a moment in which we teach real understanding among human beings, in which Booker T. Washington said over a century ago, where we speak to each other and not about each other? And if we have the amazing grace to do all of these things, then ceremonies like this will not be in vain. And among that note, thank you.
We'll do that now. Damon, thank you.
You're welcome.